We continue our discussion of the Cuban Missile Crisis with Peter Kornbluh. He is the director of the Cuba Documentation Project at the National Security Archives at George Washington University. Mr. Kornbluh was one of the first people to see nearly 3,000 pages of documents released just in time for the 50th anniversary of the missile crisis. Mr. Kornbluh, welcome to America's Now.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
Well, what was it like to get the first-hand look at all these documents after so many years? Was it everything that you expected?
Well, 50 years after the missile crisis took place, we're still getting new information on what actually happened. And these documents were the papers of Robert F. Kennedy, who was the chief confidant, the chief advisor, and the chief secret intermediary of President John Kennedy with the Soviets. He played a central role during the crisis and in the resolution of the crisis. So having his papers declassified on the anniversary was extremely important, and we're very grateful to his family for making that possible.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because explain his role in all this. Was this more of an unofficial role, a behind-the-scenes role, or is this something more at the forefront?
Now, Robert Kennedy was, of course, since he was so close to the president, his most powerful advisor and his significant enforcer in the U.S. government. He was officially Attorney General of the United States, but basically, in some ways, he was Deputy President of the United States at that point, and he had had a big role in Cuba since the failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion in April of 1961. He had basically moonlighted as Chief of Covert Operations against Cuba as well. So he knew Cuba, he was involved, he was in the official meetings, the secret meetings to decide how to respond to the presence of Soviet missiles in Cuba, and he was the one that the president sent to meet with the Soviet ambassador, Anatoly Dobrynin, and offer him a top secret deal to resolve the crisis.
Does this underscore the sense of urgency that was taking place, or was much of what was going on to the outside world exaggerated?
Oh no. This was truly the most dangerous days in the history of mankind. This was the moment, these 13 days during the Cuban Missile Crisis, at which the world came closest to nuclear Armageddon. And every man in the Oval Office meeting with John Kennedy, his top 15 aides who worked on this issue, knew this. On the night of October 27th, which was known as Black Saturday of the missile crisis, because so many things went wrong, so many things seemed to be spinning out of control, there were members of the Kennedy entourage and the Kennedy official circle who thought that they were going to have their last meal that night.
Peter, what are the lessons to be learned in this for the United States, for Russia, for Cuba?
There are two key lessons for any international conflict that are absolutely relevant to today, where we're talking about a preemptive strike against Iran, where 10 years ago George Bush used the Cuban Missile Crisis to try and justify a preemptive strike against Saddam Hussein. And those two lessons are, one, small countries like Cuba will defend themselves. If they feel threatened, they will try and get the weapons they need to defend themselves. And that was really one of the real issues at the Cuban Missile Crisis. The United States had invaded at the Bay of Pigs. Fidel felt he was threatened by John Kennedy for a future invasion, and he accepted the nuclear missiles from the Soviet Union as a deterrence against such an attack. The second lesson is even more important, and that is that the image of the missile crisis is a resolute president of the United States standing strong and the Soviets backing down. That's not the true history of what happened at the missile crisis. The United States arrived at a secret deal with Nikita Khrushchev. We would secretly take out our missiles from Turkey, which were right on the Soviet border, and the Soviets would withdraw their missiles from Cuba. So Khrushchev got something he needed and wanted in order to withdraw without any shots really being fired. The world was saved from a nuclear holocaust by a commitment to diplomacy, compromise, and accommodation between adversaries. And this is the real lesson of the missile crisis. Not that force can get your enemy to back down, but that compromise and diplomacy is necessary in a dangerous world.
Peter, thank you for your time and your insight.
Thank you.